Okay. Hi, my name is Sonia and I am entering my sophomore year of high school. I want to thank you for taking out the time to do this interview. Would you please provide some of your background information?
Hi, my name is Candace Volger. I'm the David B. and Clara E. Stern Professor of Philosophy at the University of Chicago. I'm also the chair of Virtue Theory at the Jubilee Center for Character and Virtues in Birmingham, England, and a member of the Royal Institute of Philosophy in London. And I am delighted to talk with you about the ethical situations that arise because of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Okay, so in school, we have been discussing the COVID-19 virus in several of our classes. Many of the topics have revolved around the ethical issues associated with addressing the virus. An example is the distribution of resources such as a ventilator, because at one time there was a lack of this equipment and medical professionals had to decide who would get a ventilator first. So now I was wondering if I could ask you some questions about your view on ethics and how ethics have helped you answer questions or make decisions.
Absolutely.
Okay. My first question is, do you have a set of ethical principles that you use when faced with difficult questions or situations?
Yes, I do. But I understand principles in a really old-fashioned medieval sense of that term as sources of action, attention, emotion, and response to the circumstances I'm in. So I think I operate from an overall ethical orientation. One of the views I have is that we're always in ethical situations. It's not like there's a special little class of moral situations that only arise when things are difficult. Every day, ethics is an area that I focus on specifically. So yeah, I think there's all kinds of ethical issues around the COVID-19 pandemic and responses to it.
Would you be able to provide some examples of these ethical principles?
Of course. I mean, my basic framework owes a lot to writings by a philosopher and theologian called Thomas Aquinas. So I'm a Thomist, basically. That means I've got some links to Aristotle, and I've also got links to contemporary philosophy in all kinds of ways. But in my own life as a Christian, I try to operate on the basis of taking whatever resources I have available and trying to use them in the service of a strong love for humanity. And that's the animating principle behind almost everything I do. And it frames how I see the situations I'm in. So for example, during the lockdown, almost everybody with every kind of instruction had to move to remote learning. One of the kinds of remote learning that started to happen were dance classes. My niece is in ballet. We set up a small ballet studio in our basement that people can use for remote dance classes. We did that. We also live on the south side of Chicago in a neighborhood that is probably predominantly African American, and so predominantly a group of people who were disproportionately affected by the pandemic and all of the social and economic changes that came along with it. During the Black Lives Matter protests, the first couple of days of it, looting affected the grocery stores and pharmacies in our neighborhood. So one of the things that we've been doing is distributing food and using a large community garden that my husband supervises in the lot next to our building as a place to sort of get more members of the community involved in gardening, and also growing a lot of produce for people so that they won't find themselves in a food desert 2 months from now. There'll be a source of fresh vegetables in our neighborhood coming straight out of our garden. Those are kinds of things that we've done really immediately, attempting to take resources that we have, an apartment, a garden, and try to use those to benefit the humans who live around us. Does that help?
Yes, that does. Would you be able to provide an example of a situation in which you applied these principles? And I think you've already answered this one, but yes, that was extremely helpful.
Yeah, I mean, other examples are things like just we the community garden is set up in a kind of park-like way. So we've been able to use it as a socially distanced or physically distanced, but socially intimate site for people in the community to get together and just talk about what's happening. Because one of the things that's been hardest under the lockdown in Chicago is people who are in slightly isolated circumstances anyway have not had a way to take part in their communities, share their feelings about what's going on, talk about ways that as a group we might help address the needs around us. My husband was joking that the only park open in the city is ours.
Would your ethical principles be applicable in dealing with some of the situations that we are dealing with COVID-19?
I think so. They're fundamentally egalitarian, and justice is a really important aspect of that. So things like the distribution of resources, I don't know how to deal with a triage situation. That's complicated, and I would trust medical professionals who had good characters to do a better job of figuring that out than I would. But with stuff like trying to make sure that all the children get access to such educational resources as are available, I think we've done a bad job of that. I also think my principles strongly suggest that we needed a coordinated, science-friendly federal response to a national crisis, and that it was an injustice to allow there to emerge a situation in which individual mayors and governors and community leaders understood themselves to be in a kind of competition for vital resources, ranging from like masks to, to medications. I mean, that should never have happened. There should have been a coordinated federal effort.
My next question is, do you think that any question, decision, or situation relating to COVID-19 represents a difficult ethical issue?
I think most of them do. I think that some of them have really surprised me. It looks like one bit of scientific advice has to do with the wearing of masks in public places. I confess I don't really understand the objections to wearing masks. Cloth masks are easy enough to produce and prevent. If I am positive and asymptomatic, they prevent the situation in which I'm sharing it with everyone around me. So I don't understand why that's a hard question. It looks to me like a no-brainer, but I would like to understand better, and my own ethical orientation suggests that it's important for me to try to understand why people are objecting to something that would have such a serious public health benefit, is so low cost, and is somehow controversial.
Yeah. My final question is, do you have any advice that you could provide for me as I think about ethical issues that I may face?
My biggest piece of advice to you is to realize that you don't just have ethical opinions or moral opinions, as opposed to like scientific knowledge. You have real ethical knowledge. You are clearly alert to the costs that things have for other people around you. You at least seem like an honest and a forthright person, and you seem to have a lot of kindness in you. Also, good humor, which could be actually ethically more important than people allow, because it gives you a space to balance some of the stresses. So I would actually think that the biggest thing for you would be to recognize both that you've already got a sound background of ethical knowledge that you're working from all the time, and that people are always able to cultivate their characters and become better people. Ancient, I'm still trying to improve myself. You, Sir, and I are both in the same boat with all of that.
Well, thank you so much again. This was so helpful.
I'm really glad, and it's so nice to get to have an e-conversation with you, Sam.
You as well.
Okay.